Good evening, everybody. Thanks for your attention tonight. How's everyone doing? Wow, well behaved. So you can tell it's the beginning of the school year, right? If it was later in the school year, we'd have a little more chatter, I think, out there. My name's Greg Berry. I'm co-founder and managing director of an organization called Impact Hub Boulder. We are an organization that supports business leaders who are doing transformative work, much like many of whom aspire to the level of success that we've seen from Kim tonight, and we're quite honored to co-host this organization, this evening and discussion that we'll have tonight. It's obviously an honor to be here with Silicon Flatirons. I don't have to explain. Is everybody who doesn't know about Silicon Flatirons and how great it is? Okay. And Atlas. Oh, and Atlas co-sponsoring. Absolutely. Thank you so much. It's actually funny. I live on the same block as a couple of the Atlas professors, so it shouldn't be too hard for me to remember. The thing that I want to share with you really about Impact Hub Boulder is that we're really working with leaders in this community, business owners and investors, as well as younger entrepreneurs who are building positive impact businesses. We do that through a number of different tools. The easiest one to understand and to see is the co-working space that we have right at the corner of Broadway and Walnut in downtown. If you just sort of set a car coasting down Broadway from the top of the hill, you'd run right into the hub here. And in addition, we provide a series of events and gatherings, not unlike this, although not exactly like this either. We don't have this kind of room. In addition, we've over the summer we've spent a fair bit of time prototyping and dialing in what we call an a la carte accelerator. So we provide a number of services that one might get from an accelerator, but we provide them in bite-sized pieces so that someone who needs just a class in finance, just a meeting with a prospective investor can come do that without going through the whole application and process of being part of a 6 or an 8 week incubator and accelerator like so many of you that you know. We welcome you to come down. I'll be here tonight. And I'd love to talk to you more about the work that we're doing, and if you have curiosity around positive impact and impact investing, really keen to engage that conversation for as long as you are. It's my pleasure now to introduce Trish Rogers. Trish is a partner at Moy White law firm in Denver that's really led the charge on the legal side around a number of the issues, including B corporations, and I'm sure that she'll say just a little bit more about what B corporations are about and why Moy White, as well as Impact Hub Boulder, are in fact B Corps ourselves. And with that, I'd like to introduce you to Trish. Thank you.
Thank you, Greg. In fact, I'm not going to talk about myself or the firm or B Corps too much tonight. Other than to say, if you are an early stage entrepreneurial company or even a later stage company, definitely look into B Lab. They have an office here in Boulder, and B Corporations. It is a great way to form your corporation or convert your corporation. Colorado does have a statute that allows you to become a B Corporation, but you can also become a B Lab certified B Corp, whether you're an LLC or an LLP or whatever form your entity takes. And it's definitely worth looking into. Before we get started tonight with introductions, I wanted to see if there are any community announcements out there that anyone wants to make to the community as a whole. Andy, do you have? Andy in particular?
Yeah, so just wanted to make a couple of announcements, things to put on your calendar and in the front of your mind. First off, we are having the return of our Crash Course series on September 17th. It's going to feature a crash course on design experience, and Brian Baker of the First User Group is going to be leading that, and he'll have a panel of experts at his side. Brian's a veteran of about 20 years in the industry, and he and his panel will help you better understand how to take your product, your service, your website, and make it more appealing to your customers. So yeah, September 17th, room 301, 6:15 to 7:45. That'll be here at the law school. Second, as the director of the New Venture Challenge, I wanted to give a plug to that program. For those of you who don't know, the New Venture Challenge is in its 7th year, and that's the premier business plan competition here at CU. And we have students participating all across campus. It's a wonderful experience for those students who have a very entrepreneurial spirit. And we are hosting our fall kickoff on September 29th, and that's going to feature Julian Ferrier of Backflip Studios here in Boulder, and he's going to be giving the keynote speech. So those of you students in the audience, would hope there's a lot of you with the entrepreneurial bent. I hope to see you there. Actually, I better see you there. And lastly, I wanted to announce that our website, boulderstartups.org, has relaunched and rebranded. And that's kind of your one-stop shop for all things resource related to the Boulder entrepreneurial scene. And that site currently features a listing of and description of all the on-campus and off-campus resources in the scene, a comprehensive events calendar, and a helpful tool for connecting students to startups and vice versa. So it's a great website for those of you who are new to the scene and would like to know more about the entrepreneurial scene here in Boulder and would like to know how to better get involved with it. So that's what I've got.
Other community announcements?
Actually, sorry, I almost forgot. We have 4 internship opportunities open right now at Hub, ranging from hosting and working directly with our members to marketing and events production. So easy to find at impacthubboulder.com.
Delay you just a second. We do have a tradition. For a second, introduce yourself. So reach out to somebody that you have not met before tonight. Reconvene in a minute. We'll get started.
So actually, I do have a question.
Okay.
One of the questions I have is whether Quaker beliefs in any way influenced your beliefs towards the company. And so Quakers, from what I've read briefly, don't have any.
You've been busy with my
With your
background. Yeah.
Don't believe in a lot of hierarchy within the church organization.
Right.
And did that influence you at all?
I think that's certainly a piece of it, and I think just generally speaking, and if I grew up in a liberal family.
That's
and,
what.
brand. So.
Well, and you have a nice shirt and a nice jacket on. I also think, well, frankly,
Okay.
I can't wear any dresses because I'm breastfeeding.
Right.
And so
Everyone's getting to know each other pretty well. I think we're ready to go.
Top and bottom.
but I do like.
I've forgotten that a time or two when I was nursing, and it was like, okay.
It's awkward. You
Now
have
what
to
do
find
we
somewhere
do?
pretty private.
Okay. It's a willing audience.
My shushes aren't loud enough. I needed some help up here. So one more very special announcement before we get started. After the event tonight, there will be food and drink for everyone. And unlike normally the Unplugged events are drier than Opelika, Alabama on a Sunday. But because of this evening's guest, we will have some New Belgium beer available as well. So with that, I want to wish everyone a good evening. My name, as Greg mentioned, is Trish Rogers, and I am, among many things, a corporate lawyer at Moy White, which is a certified B Corp. I'm also on the Entrepreneurial Advisory Board of Silicon Flatirons, and I'm very honored to be here tonight to introduce our guest entrepreneur, who is both the CEO and an employee owner of a company that is consistently one of Outside Magazine's best places to work. I think when you hear tonight's presentation, you will agree with that, as I do. In my role as an advisor to entrepreneurs, one of the main questions and concerns I often hear them voice is that they want to maintain control of their companies. They want to own a majority of the stock. They want to make all the decisions. They want to make sure their company is successful, which is reasonable, right? Well, Kim Jordan, since co-founding New Belgium in 1991, has done the exact opposite. In 2012, Kim and some of the other company shareholders sold all of their stock in New Belgium to their employee stock ownership program, their ESOP, giving employees through the ESOP 100% control of the company, effectively giving up that majority interest that everyone wants. So now the employees, after being employed with the company for a year, every employee gets a piece of the fat tire pie. They all own a piece of the company. And Kim no longer owns a majority. The result, the company has continued to grow and be successful. They now employ 560 people throughout the U.S., and with the addition of a new facility in Asheville in 2015, they'll add about 150 more people. So I asked Kim, you know, New Belgium is this fun company. How, as you grow, do you keep the company from becoming an institution, becoming too institutional and less fun? And Kim's answer again to me was, well, I don't. It's not my responsibility. While the company provides a lot of opportunities for their employees to be social, Kim noted that it's not up to her, but it's up to everyone in the company to maintain that sense of community. And they do. I repeatedly hear people who work at New Belgium talk about a culture of ritual, sustainability, community, tradition, and fun. Across the board, everybody repeats that. Anytime you talk to someone that works at New Belgium, you're going to hear those words, I guarantee it. A true sense of ownership and responsibility does permeate the company. For example, a few years ago, a production line employee had mentioned that it might be less expensive, might save money if they wash the outside of beer bottles, which, you know, don't have to be as clean as the inside of beer bottles, with the same water they were using to rinse off the inside of the beer bottles. That ended up saving the company 1,000 gallons of water usage per hour. So an idea from a production line employee both saves money and saves the environment. All employees participate in major decisions and minor decisions. When a new beer comes out and they need a name, they go out to the employees to come up with ideas. There is, as you may guess, a strong culture of environmentalism as well at the company, environmental stewardship. You can read about all of this online. They have their sustainability reports online, their goals for being sustainable online, their environmental goals, as well as their plan for how they're going to meet those goals. They share those. Because even though New Belgium's a private company, they're very, very transparent. So while Kim is still a leader of the overall direction of the company, she's given up that key point of control, releasing control to her employees, providing a tangible sense of ownership, sustainability, and community to her coworkers. She's created rather than given up success. So with that, it is my pleasure to introduce one of the many owners and idea producers of New Belgium and a leader of the tribe, Kim Jordan.
Thank you. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Trish. So in terms of the room, give me some sense about who is here. How many are first-time attendees to an Entrepreneurs Unplugged session? All right.
Nice.
From the CU campus? Okay. Entrepreneurs? And keep your hand with your a founder entrepreneur.
Nice.
We seem to get more founders than we had entrepreneurs. Okay, that's cool. So for those of you who are here for the first time, the Unplugged format is more or less the actor studio. So Jill, who's the associate director at Atlas, and I will ask questions for the next 55 minutes. About 7:30, we'll open it up and we'll take 15 minutes of full-on Q&A with everybody in the room. And then we will adjourn, as Trish alluded to a tasty beverage next door. We've got 4 topics in mind that Jill and I are going to tee up. First, we're going to start with some of the background, where Kim came from and some of her early influences. And then second, we'll get into the early days of New Belgium. Third, growing an intentional company with both an emphasis on internal culture as well as external impact. And then finally, some of the current expansion, which has been really notable, and what's coming next. So that's the big picture, where we're going. Jill, you want to get us underway?
Yeah, let's start sort of pre-New Belgium, even pre-Colorado, and just give us a sense of Kim Jordan growing up, your family, some of those dynamics.
And so, so I was born, and
Yeah, exactly.
I can start way back then. But I would say that I was raised in a fairly liberal family. My dad was Pat Brown's press secretary when he was the governor of California. Jerry Brown is Pat Brown's son, the current governor, current second time around governor. And that, so we lived in Sacramento. We moved to Washington, D.C. because when Pat Brown lost to Ronald Reagan as governor, Lyndon Johnson was president and he was hiring Democrats, so we moved to the D.C. area. I tell this story to my coworkers a lot, and they look at me and I realize, like, you weren't even close to being born when all of that happened. So we moved to Washington, D.C. I went to a Quaker high school, and those two things, a family that in some ways was uncomfortable with the profit motive. You know, there are a lot of people who don't experience business firsthand who make assumptions about what that means. And so I had this opportunity to create a business in a different kind of way. And I was also deeply directed by going to a Quaker high school. George Fox, who is one of the founders of Quakerism in America, said, let your life speak. And for me, that really translated into that I had this opportunity as well to let my business life speak. And that has been an absolutely joyful journey with a lot of surprises along the way.
And so you graduate high school early?
I was 16 when I graduated from high school, and I moved to Colorado when I was 17, packed up my little Volvo car and moved here. I didn't go to CSU right away. I had a few sort of adventures. I lived in a teepee. I've been a caretaker of a racehorse ranch. I've done small mammal trapping and bird surveying for the Fish and Wildlife Service.
All of this leading up to
you
running.
guys are getting the story that rarely gets told here. So, yeah, and at then later I started going to CSU. I put myself through school, so it was the 10-year process. I worked and, drove a school bus, did ski buses, was a firefighter. Short order cook.
We need a few more
fun.
hours.
Yeah.
I hope you guys don't have anything after this.
I'll stop.
And so then you study social work.
Yeah.
And become a social worker. And how did that experience shape your later experience as an entrepreneur?
Social work is a really generalist perspective. It's really systems thinking, and that's been really important at New Belgium. We don't say who blew it. I mean, every once in a while, if the same person is blowing it over and over, or they're in the vicinity of things blowing up, we might say, it doesn't seem like you're learning. But for the most part, we really look at how does the system work or not work to help people be successful at what they're doing. And that's really, for me, comes directly from social work.
So super interesting in terms of the breadth of your experiences. Quaker, education, firefighter, mammal trapper, living in a teepee, social worker. As you wind those experiences forward, they're not backgrounds that you think about in terms of the profit motive and relations to money. Do those backgrounds inform your philosophy of how you think about money and its importance or lack thereof?
I have had no money, and now I'm in the happy circumstance of having a lot of money. And while it certainly having money is makes life easier, all of those adages about it doesn't make you happy are true. It does make life easier, but it's not that meaningful to me. I don't want a lot of stuff. I like a car that starts on a regular basis because that's important. And I drive an old reconditioned single-speed Bianchi frame bicycle that I had a local guy put together for my, my daily commuter. And I'm lucky. My boyfriend and I do have a house in San Francisco, so we try to spend some time there. We slept through the earthquake, by the way, so we are not going to be very, very prepared if things go badly, apparently. So, but so, you know, and I'll get into what has happened with our funds from the sale at some point, but I won't let that cat out of the bag yet, so.
Well, wind us forward to the early days. So you met your co-founder, Jeff, circa 1990.
Yeah.
You guys launched the company in 1991. Wind us forward to those early days, the decision to make a go of it. And you weren't all in on day one, right? You kept your day job.
Right.
Jeff kept his day job. Talk about those early years.
So my then husband, Jeff Liebisch, is really the founder of New Belgium, and I always describe myself as a co-founder. He was a home brewer, and sometimes I'm not sure. When I tell this story, people are like, you're making me uncomfortable here, but he's classic engineer, very shy, introverted, super bright, really loved his idea of a really good time is to plan out a project for like super intensely. And we met and we started dating, and I honestly think, this is the uncomfortable part, I honestly think he was like, she could run the front of the business. This will work out well for me. So, and beer was always my drink of choice, and I'm not very fearful. You know, it was like, if the thing that made me afraid was, what if I say, oh, you know, we're about to get married and have kids and we won't be secure, or what if we say, damn, we should have done that thing. It's like, we can always go back to our day jobs, and we should try this thing. We should just jump in. And I think that comes from a breadth of different experiences. Like, not everyone says, sure, I'll move to northern Nevada, the smallest population per acre in the continental United States, and trap small mammals, including snakes, which I realize are not mammals, but they would get in my traps. You know, so it was easy just to kind of move into that adventure. And it was an adventure. We built an addition onto our house that was not as big as sort of this space that we're in here, 12 by 22 feet. And we started the brewery down there.
And so tell me a little bit about, you're not fearful. Were other people in your life fearful at that time? Did you get?
Sure. Not so much my parents, which is interesting, but food for thought and fodder. But Jeff's boss, I think in part because he was pretty instrumental in the company, didn't want him to go, and said some things that I know later he regretted, but at the time, you know, that's totally stupid, your family won't be safe, those kinds of things. People told us that Fat Tire was a terrible name for a beer and that we should really reconsider that whole idea. Good thing.
My dad still calls it Flat Tire.
Yeah, he's not alone. I always smile and people do, So, and you know, remember, this was 1991, so craft beer is on every street corner now. But it really wasn't then. Boulder Beer was certainly a pioneer and deserving of a lot of credit in our movement. Sierra Nevada, Anchor, a couple of other breweries, but there weren't a ton of them around. Breckenridge was like a year before us. Wynkoop was a couple of years before us. But it was not the phenomenon it is now. So Jeff had done some home brewing, and we went to a midwinter bluegrass festival. And Abbey, if you're familiar with our beers, it's a Trappist double ale. It's very malty, and it has an estery kind of phenolic finish of cloves and bananas. And we thought, because we were a New Belgium Brewing Company, that would be our flagship beer. So I would take these trays of beer out and I would pass them out to people, and they would, you know, look really strangely, and I'd take the tray back and Jeff would pour me, like, go ahead, go. And like, I don't want to go out there. They don't really seem to like this. So, you know, but we kept after it.
Were palates different then? So, you know, there's a generation now that's accustomed to flavorful craft beers. I'm thinking 1990, that may not
Yeah,
have been the
sure.
case. Or-
Palates were different. Selection, variety was different. Hoppy beers were really not around, if at all, not around very much. We were the first brewery in the United States to specialize in Belgian styles, the first brewery to do wood beers. When we took our beers to the Great American Beer Festival for the first 3 years, they didn't judge them because they didn't have categories for Belgian styles. So yeah, we've done, again, kind of in that theme of, well, that sounds like fun. Let's try that.
A couple quick questions on these earlier. Can you give us a typical day that you were working, say 1991, 1992? What would that look like, especially while you're still doing social work?
In 91, I was still working. I was working 4 days a week. So I would, because I had really good insurance and we were trying to have a baby. So I would go to work, do my social work thing, come home in the evening. We had one child, and I would, we would do the evening thing, put him to bed, and then later in the evening I would go to Kinko's and make color copies and table tents and shelf talkers, all point of sale for breweries. And then on Friday, the day that I did not work as a social worker, I would take my son to school in the morning, call all the accounts, get their orders, load the family station wagon up with cases of beer, go around and deliver beer, and then at 3:15 I would go pick my son up at kindergarten, and he would sit in the car with me, and I would drive around, and sometimes I was delivering beer until 8 or 9 at night, and I was younger then, certainly, and you just do those things, and you do them because that's what entrepreneurs do. It's not an easy life a lot of times. We would go to beer festivals many weekends. We would split the parenting, brewing, bottling until our second son was born. I bottled regularly after being once our oldest was in bed. So,
how'd you finance it at the start?
We took a second mortgage out on our house. And Jeff, as an engineer, these were in the good old days when they sent those things out that said, you have been pre-approved for a $10,000 line of credit. They send those to engineers. They really don't send those to social workers. So we took out 3 of those. At one point, we had trouble making payroll. I called my parents, who sent us $5,000, and we never missed payroll for our coworkers. We spent about 9 months living off of credit cards. So it's one of those kind of crazy entrepreneurial stories.
And so when people talk about balance, do you think, wow, I wish I would have had more balance, different balance?
I think balance is totally overrated, honestly. You need to kind of go rushing to the thing that you're loving at that moment and do it and just jump into it. And then you also have opportunities to say, okay, now I need to rest and walk to the park with the kids, whatever. But I do sometimes feel like people get caught up in this notion, too much stress is certainly not good for us. But part of what stress does is to build resiliency. When you lift weights, you stress your muscles. It makes little micro tears in there. And that's how you build muscle mass, because your cells, with the help of protein and other things, help that to happen. So, I think people stress that too much, personally.
So if that wasn't the mistake, what was the biggest mistake sort of in the first 5-year time frame?
I think that entrepreneurialism is death by 1,000 cuts in some ways. And I can't really, we had a couple of mistakes. I'll tell you about one of them. But it's not the one big thing. It's oh gosh, that was a bummer, and hello mom, that kind of thing. but at least for us, we picked a distributor in Denver. I was saying to Jill that I took, because she has a young baby, I took my young baby to this distributor meeting, and I was nursing him, and I, brought a blanket along to nurse him. And for the 15 years that we had that distributor, every time I'd see them, they would tell me that story like it was the most exotic thing ever. But they were actually our second distributor, because the first distributor that we picked, we sent them a pallet of beer, all nice and shrink wrapped, a couple of pallets actually. They put it in their warehouse. We called them the next week and said, so do you want some more beer? No, we're fine. Week 2, no, we're fine. Week 3, no, we're fine. And I think Jeff and I waited too long. By end of week 3, we drove down to Denver. It was all still shrink wrapped. They hadn't opened any of it. They didn't intend to sell our beer. They represented another brewery, another craft brewery, and they wanted to make sure that they would have no competition. So, those are things that you learn. And there were so many things we learned along the way. And one of the things that was really helpful was Jeff's and my skill sets were very different but complementary. So we didn't really overlap one another's work all that much, which was good. And between us, we had a nice broad set of capability, which really helped.
Fat Tire was the beer that kind of converted me to craft brewing.
Oh, good, thanks.
Tell us the story of Fat Tire, from the recipe to the name, and at what point did you realize this was something that was going to really help the company?
Fat Tire got its name because Jeff was on a mountain bike trip in Europe, and he tasted some beers that he wanted to emulate as a home brewer. And in honor of the mountain bike trip way back then, this was in the late 80s, he called the beer Fat Tire because he was riding a mountain bike. And in those days, people would say, I have a Fat Tire bike. And so he brewed it as a home brewer. And its claim to fame, and something that I think people forget about it, is that it's really well balanced. We kind of call it a canary in the coal mine, because if you have a beer that's super flavorful, it's really easy to mask brewing defects in there. And with a beer that is a very complementary blend of hoppy and malty, that's not so easy. So, and we did some consumer research years ago about brand recall. And people could recall where they had their first Fat Tire in a remarkable level compared to many other craft beers that were out there, which I just think is sort of an interesting factoid. It is an interesting dynamic having a flagship 23 years later with so much other variety. We find there are a lot of people who still really love Fat Tire, and a lot of people who say, oh, I liked it way back when, but I've certainly grown past a beer like that. We think we make a breadth of beers, and one of the things that we had 4 core values and beliefs in the beginning. We hadn't yet made any beer, and we did this. One was to produce world-class beer. One was to promote beer culture, because this was 91, where beer drinking was cold and yellow and, kind of the drink of the knucklehead. When you think about how Miller, Coors, Anheuser-Busch portrayed beer to beer drinkers. One was to have fun, and one was to be environmental stewards. And we have thrown away a lot of beer over 23 years. Because if you're not budgeting for bad beer and not selling it and getting rid of it and eating the cost of that labor and raw materials, you're not really serious about quality. And we have always, one time Jeff and I had a cherry beer that ended up having issues, and Nick was still a baby at this point. We rented a van, drove to Denver, took the corporate checkbook, went mall to pocket mall in Denver, buying back cases of old cherry, standing right there with the baby and the checkbook, buying back beer because it was like, we don't want our brand new customers to drink this beer. It wasn't bad, and the beer can't make you sick. It's, excessive consumption. I'm over, but I'm not talking about that. I'm talking literally sick.
Lots of freshmen this weekend.
Yeah. So.
Well, just wanted to support from the moment you talked about, and my heart skips a beat every time an entrepreneur says we cut payroll from our personal account or we max a second mortgage. I mean, that is probably what differentiates us who hang around with entrepreneurs from pure entrepreneurs. But you go from that. At what point did you realize that Fat Tire was starting to really hit and that this was going to go well?
Because our overhead was really non-existent. We built that brewery and rolled that into our mortgage payment. We were able to be profitable pretty early on. And, we weren't paying ourselves. There were only a few times where we had, our initial equipment was all designed by Jeff, and it was built by a dairy manufacturer. So that may be unusual for craft breweries, but we were profitable, and we were very careful with money. And we were, I went to Kinko's because it was much cheaper in terms of cash flow than going to a printer was. A printer, if you were going to make a run of a couple of thousand, would of course be cheaper. But I could make a run of 40 in one evening, and that was all I needed for, what I was doing then, and that was the cash that I had to do it. So
let me follow up on something that Trish teed up in terms of employee culture and some of the distinguishing attributes of New Belgium. So cruiser bikes all over the place, tattooed with the New Belgium emblem. Parking spots closer to the entrance that are reserved for those who carpool or drive vehicles that get north of 40 miles per gallon. A spiraling slide that'll take you down to the first floor tap room. Give us a story or two behind these inspirations and how they relate to your vision of culture within the company.
Well, you picked a funny mix of things there. So sort of broadly speaking, you spend a hell of a lot of time in this thing that we call work, and especially when it's a community of people. And if that can't feel warm, and one of the words that Trish didn't use was love, which is something that we use pretty freely at New Belgium. If it can't feel like people truly care about you and that fun is a part of the lay of the land, I think that's a real tragedy, because what are we going to look back and say we did if it's not, we had better, I don't know. I can't even come up with the rest of that. So for me, sort of setting and we make beer. If you can't have fun doing that, you're seriously challenged. So we wanted, the bike was an idea of one of my coworkers who said, we've got this beer that's iconic in this way, and this was probably, he still works with us, this was probably in 1994. And so we decided to start giving out bikes at the 1-year anniversary. The slide, our builder was like, yep, no, can't find an adult-sized slide. I found the adult-sized slide because it was like, oh yeah, we are having a slide. And some of those other things are kind of the way that you say, yes, commuting to work by bicycle or carpooling or driving a high gas miles per gallon vehicle is important. You get, everything we do is brand. And I mean that in the very best sense of the word. And you get to signal your intent with thousands of decisions that you make. And I say, so let's make the ones that are congruent with, what we say matters to us. Because otherwise it only sort of matters. And people were a little bit like, I think you're reaching with the carpool thing. I was like, yeah, I know. That's fine. I'm the boss. Don't put your car there.
Well, you had enough cash too, right? If you're making payroll, And if you're not so motivated by profit,
You can buy people bikes, yeah.
yeah.
And now we do, my idea was at 5 years, we do we do a trip to Belgium. So on your 5-year year, we take that whole group of people and we go to Belgium for a week and bum around.
That's
So, yeah, it's fun.
So, following up on another thing that Trish brought up, talk about the decision in 1996 you decide to open up the books to the employees. You and your husband sell 10% of your stock, and then in 2000 merge that with an employee stock ownership plan.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about that, what the motivation was for doing those things, and how it kind of played out.
Okay. I want to circle back on something that Trish said. I actually, if you're an entrepreneur and you're trying to decide what you want to do about keeping control of your business, I would encourage you to keep control of your business. Because at least, I mean, that was really important to me in the beginning. Because, and there were many times where it was borne out that it was a good thing to be able to say, no, we're not doing this, we're doing this. We had a number of years to build up to this notion of everyone owning the company. So we started in 91. We had a guy who volunteered in 92. We decided we wanted him to stay because he was bright and he worked hard and he could work as long as we worked. And so we gave him a 10% pot of equity. And then in 95, I read I'd been sort of noodling, how do we share equity with everyone? Because it takes all of us to make this work. And I read The Great Game of Business by Jack Stack. And if you're in business and you're thinking about a way to create sort of a financial culture, people who are financially literate, he's the father of the open book management movement. And I was nervous. You know, here we had this business, we were starting to make some money. Brewing is very capital intensive, so everything we made, we were pouring back into the company. And although we were at that point, by 94, taking salaries. And I decided we would do a little test. We've had a retreat every year since the time we made the 4 core values and beliefs. And I gave everyone a quiz. Said you took in $100, you had to pay people for their labor, raw materials, other things that businesses need. How much money did we have at the end of the day? And people said that we had $60 of that $100. And when I say that to groups of business people, they all laugh and, you know, slap their thighs, because most of us would kill for a 60% net profit. I mean, that's not, a net profit that high is just not heard of, really. I mean, I think Pet Rocks might have hit that at one point. But, so it was clear to me, like, they're already making these stories about where the money is going. We might as well open the books. And we're a pretty blue-collar workforce. And I mean that with great affection. I mean, we wear boots and we run scrubby pads. And so, you know, at that time, our average employee was a 25-year-old guy, probably, with very little financial acumen. So it was really an investment in making, and we teach financial literacy. We go over the books every month. We talk about why this ratio matters. We talk about the bank covenants. We talk about the levels of our bank financing depending on where we hit the covenants. We talk about all of our strategy, but it all started with reading that book and giving my coworkers that quiz. And then it was, okay, now what are we going to do? So we created a 10% pot of phantom equity, essentially, because if we actually gave them shares, they would have to sell part of those shares back to us, because that creates a taxable event. And so we gave them synthetic equity. And it was a promissory note. You know, we promised to pay them, and we had the company valued by at that point by our accountant every year. So we had somebody outside of the company sort of pegging, you know, how we were growing and what we were worth. And then Jeff and I started doing some estate planning, and the thing with our one sweat equity partner was he still works with us, great guy, but it wasn't working as elegantly as we wanted. So we bought him out. Actually, the ESOP bought him out. He got cash. We then sold 22% of our ownership to the ESOP. As soon as that 22% was worth more than the 10% that they had in their individual accounts, one went away and the other took over. So by 2000, we were in ESOP where they owned 32%.
And just to define ESOP, this is
Employee Stock Ownership Plan. It's a tax preferred status, really. And I can explain that if someone has, it's a bit dry, so I'll leave that
There's
for
about
now.
3 law students that would love to hear more about it.
Okay, well, raise your hand later and we'll go over that. And then when Jeff and I decided to get a divorce, he hadn't worked at the company since 2000, and we divorced in 2009. The company and I bought his shares back. That created a different denominator. So by that time, the ESOP owned 41%. And my board had really been saying to me, if you don't have a board of directors in your company, I would suggest you get one, because it's fabulous to have people outside of you, really ask you important questions. And they'd been saying, you don't have to pull the trigger on whatever your company perpetuation, succession strategy, legacy plan is, but you do have to get a plan together. And it's like that adage about getting a job. The time that you want to do that is when you don't need to do it. Because we wandered through every possibility more than once, more than twice in some cases. We met with private equity people, we met with investment bankers, we met with family officing people, we talked to people about doing an initial public offering. We did all of those things, and we had some experience with ESOPs. We talked to some strategic buyers, international strategic buyers. And then we also talked with some people who worked with ESOPs to transition companies. And we decided for us that because we had this incredibly strong culture, and because it really mattered to me, to my boys who were also owners at that time, and to the management coworkers, the things that got us on the front of our seat was, how do we prove this business model? How do we make this something that entrepreneurs might look at and say, this is kind of an interesting way to run a company and to transition into a second generation. And so we decided to sell the company to them. We didn't sell it for a bargain basement price, but we were way, way under what we could have gotten in a strategic offering. But again, it enabled us to do the thing we wanted to do. And, there's only so much money that's meaningful. In fact, my boys and I took half of this transaction is only partially, the ownership has totally switched, but we have an agreement with them, and so we've done the first tranche of it. We gave half of that tranche we started a foundation with half of that tranche, and we'll put half of the next 2 tranches in that foundation as well. And they know, 1, you didn't work to get this money. 2, it's an insane amount of money, and you don't need that kind of wealth. You need to work, you need to have purpose, life needs to have meaning. And 3, we can do some really interesting things between investing in for-profit companies that are doing really interesting work, and we can do some interesting things with philanthropy. And we've been able to do that, not unlike starting New Belgium, with a kind of naive learner's stance. And we talk to people who have been in it for a while, who are impressed with what we came up with, because we didn't know any better. We didn't hire someone to run the foundation who had any prior foundation background. We hired a really smart Vassar grad. So,
You highlighted two items of the relationship with employees, now ownership of employees. One is radical transparency, financial literacy, making them stakeholders that way. Second is owners. And third is strategically.
Yeah.
As I understand it, you do an annual retreat with all the employees, about 550 now. And
we are experts with clipboards because we do it outside.
and it's strategic in terms of the retreat.
Yeah.
Can you give us an idea or two from a retreat over the years that's been surfaced from the employees?
Yeah, when we decided that we were going to expand into several states, we had 2 or 3 things on the docket, and they were sort of the big rocks, as we call them. And we said, you know, the board is in charge of the biggest rocks, and here's what we think they are. And we spent much of the day, we also try to make sure that we have, you know, fun in there as well. We spent much of the day, though, devising. We have a very well-developed strategy process. You know, what are the pitfalls? What do we make sure that we attend to? How are we going to account for our environmental footprint when we're shipping beer to the East Coast? Which, you know, their answer was, we're going to build the next brewery there. So we expect them to participate in the business of running the business, especially now that they own the company. And we, you know, they can look at the strategy anytime they want. It's all on our MotherNet. All of our financials are there. Yeah, so it works pretty well.
You said something earlier that's very interesting, which is that the all employee ownership and including them as key stakeholders in decisions works now. It would not have worked earlier. You know, one way to think about this is maybe the reverse, that with 4 founders, you could do things by consensus, never could own something, but as the organization gets to be super large, that decentralized processes would be more problematic. Explain why it works now as opposed to earlier. That's a really interesting observation.
It might have worked earlier, but it wouldn't have perhaps had the same grounding in our philosophy that it does now, because we had the opportunity as, I believe that leaders should lead. I don't think, I believe in as flat a hierarchy as we can make, but I think it's a mistake to say, you know, we're all going to make all decisions, or, you know, even though I spend the vast majority of my time sort of scanning the longer term horizon, you who, you know, works in the bottling hall may have as much great strategy. We all have our expertise in our area. And those years enabled me to sort of drive our philosophy deep into the organization. And that's helped us to, you know, that it's now a part of everyone who's been there for a while. It's a part of their DNA. So for us it worked, and I would say I have friends in this industry who have partners, and it gets to the point where they're, you know, a lot of people in the craft brewing movement are about my age, and they're all starting to look at like, okay, what am I going to do about this exit thing? And when you have 4 partners and 3 of them want to do one thing and 1 of them wants to do another thing, you know, I mean, it's not, that's not, there are lots of different options are fraught. And for us, this has been a fabulous one.
So in the media, you've said that women need to assert themselves to be taken seriously in business, and that there can be feminine traits and masculine traits, and that to be successful, it's nice to have both as a leader. Mm-hmm. And so talk to me about how you can have these masculine traits or feminine traits and still feel sort of true to yourself. How have you developed your style as a leader?
I like to win. And I think people who say losing is as good as winning haven't won very much. And to win, you have to be competitive. And that's kind of more of a masculine trait. But this is a business, and and we give lots of money away, and we do lots of really interesting things for people in the community because we want to. But if we're not profitable, we can't do any of that stuff. And so that's a masculine trait. I'm also a fabulous sharer, and I think that collaboration is the most fun ever. And those tend to be more feminine traits. So I think I'm a feminist, but I get uncomfortable with the notion that one skill set is going to be the one either way, or that women own, the collaborative skill set and men own the competitive skill set. I know men and women who have wonderful mixes of the two things, and I think that's important.
It seems to me that with the broad background and observations like you just articulated about different skill sets, that you are able to draw upon that breadth, that your palette might be just a little bit wider than most. Do you surprise people around you on a regular basis in terms of decisions that you've made as a leader?
Sometimes.
Can you give us an example?
I'm also, so I really never want to lose sight of our craft. And so when our brewmaster said, I have a lead on 60 fooders. Fooders are wooden vessels that can make wood-aged beer, and they're tall. They're taller than this room. And, we need more fooders like we need a hole in our head. But I was like, yeah, let's get the fooders. Or cans. I said, we need a can line. Let's get the can line now. Or someone came and said, I really think that we need adoption assistance for people, because really when you think about how much it costs to underwrite the cost of birthing a baby, it's really about the same as what it costs. And I appreciate people's good ideas. I don't know if those are radical enough for you. I'm sure I've had more radical ideas.
Let me draw a comparison to a company here in Boulder that went public last year, Rally.
Uh-huh.
And when you were talking about from the outset having core company values that you articulated even before you started making beer, that reminds me a lot of how Ryan Martin's approached Rally from the get-go, where there was a certain standards and values that he embedded into the DNA from the start.
Yeah.
If you were talking to, say, an entrepreneurial team off the campus that's thinking about getting something going, is that an approach that you'd recommend all businesses take, or are there certain situations which that might work better than others?
I speak about what we do and why we do it a fair amount. And so one of the things I would say right off the bat is get one language, because your purpose and your mission and your, core values can be approximately the same thing, and you spend a lot of time in confusion if you don't get one language for those things. And that may seem easy and sort of silly, but we are still surprised 23 years later when we're talking about something and we're like, wait a minute, what are we talking about here? And when you start to kind of peel it apart, you have people talking about somewhat different things. And if we got one language for it, it just makes it a lot easier. And it makes alignment and sort of the power of this as opposed to disbursement much stronger. So that's for me one. Another is how we have had codified beliefs. Those 4 that I gave you, you'll notice that there was nothing about our coworkers or about our customers. We didn't have either of those when we did that, and it didn't even occur to us that maybe that was an oversight on our part. So we circled back and did that. Yeah, that's how naive we were. We did that later, but I really think codifying what you stand for and understanding as a leader that you have to make the choices that make that real, whether it's the parking spaces or the $16 million investment in processed water treatment to turn it into methane, to turn that into, heat and energy. If you really get very clear on what matters to you with everyone in your tribe at that time, everyone was there when we changed from the 4 to the 10, and you make decisions that are consistent with that. It's that and ownership and open book management have been just like this incredible engine for us. And I think they're an incredible engine for any company. I don't think we're unique to that.
Let's bring this current. So just to give you people some numbers in terms of where New Belgium is, about $190 million in annual revenue.
200.
Sorry to shortchange you guys by 10. And building the East Coast brewery that you talked about down in North Carolina, and that's about a $140 million investment,
Yes.
correct? So really big numbers 25 years later. Where are the threats right now? It's such a vastly changed environment than the one in which you all started in. What makes you worried now?
There is a lot of competition these days, especially in the on-premise bars and restaurants. There are a lot of breweries that are teeny who are really able to sell in those markets. And that in and of itself, while, occasionally you want to sort of, I told you I like to win. More than that is, for me, is a concern about the quality of beer and the quality of the community, the flavor for the community of craft brewers. Because craft brewing right now is a very collegial, fun industry where a lot of us are close friends. And I worry a bit about this sort of new wave of brewers coming in, kind of losing sight. There have been, recently, the pace of sort of lawsuits over trademark names is sort of picking up some steam. And those things, we own a collective brand among the 2,800 craft brewers in the United States. And it's really important that we, just like I say that my coworkers are in charge of community, we're collectively in charge of making sure that, beer drinkers like us in part because we're fun. And we get along really well. And who, doesn't love going into a brewery and seeing the brewmaster hanging with, people who work there and drinking beer and, whatever. So I worry about that. For us personally, I think we are, $140 million is not chump change for sure. And, but I feel like we have this great foundation of values and a lot of drive to be very good at what we do, and a lot of awareness of what it takes to do that among a broad group of people.
Last question, then we'll open it up. And we do have a student priority rule, so we'll get the first question to student. The point about culture echoes, I think, a discussion that happens here in Boulder on a semi-regular basis, that certainly entrepreneurship is deeply ingrained here. There's been many generations before this one, but there's something kind of magic that's occurred from 2005 or 6 to today. And I think there's a similar anxiety that part of the reason this has worked is it's the kind of community where anybody can get coffee with anybody. And as you start to get more people onto that network, there's a concern whether some of those norms will fray over time, and you wake up and suddenly the things that made it a magical community may not necessarily be in place. How do you protect that in terms of culture?
It's the little things and the big things. It's continuing to sort of foster a culture where silly hallway conversations happen. One of my coworkers, there were actually two of them, they were pushing this pallet of kegs through a double set of doors. It was a woman and a man. She was in the back pushing, and I said, that is a wide load, because the kegs were hanging over the side. And she said, you're talking about the kegs, I assume. And I said, oh, yeah, your load looks fabulous. And then I went, oh, is that one of those things? I said, is that an HR offense? And they were both like, no, it's not. So, from the simplest, that people cook lunch. We have a kitchen, and people bring their food in and cook lunch and talk to one another. And, kids come in with their parents for part of a day or all day and hang out, and we know their names through ritual. I'm a big believer in ceremony and ritual. I think you have to stop and take the time to appreciate one another, to mark big events. We have this thing we call Adopt a Ranger. Once a year, all of our sales force comes back, and people at the brewery have them over to their house for dinner. And it's one of those things that we will keep doing, because that's how you build a shared culture. And we underwrite the cost of food at the brewery. We give them money to go buy food to be able to make a dinner like that. So
let's open up for questions. We'll have a student priority. Student? Yeah. And we've got a microphone. If you just hang on for a second, Greg's going to bring that over.
It's sort of a follow-up question to the concept of an entrepreneurial founder losing some control in the move to an ESOP. Can you talk a little bit about the corporate governance of the company and how it changed with the transition to the ESOP, and how much control or where things have changed?
That's a great question. Two things happened. One, right before the transaction, we adopted B Corp status. We'd been doing so many of the B Corp things that it was not a stretch at all for us to consider that. And we're almost at the finish line with B Corp, the ability to actually elect a benefit corporation status here in Colorado. It's not quite done, but we're getting there. And we did that in part because it enables the board of directors to make choices that are for the benefit of a broader set of stakeholders, and we could, codify that in our through the B Corp election. And we also did it in part because the board has taken on a new level of importance in the company. And I think that will be even more true when I'm gone. I think there is still a bit of like, how could we tell her not to do that or whatever, because I'm a co-founder. But we have an outside trustee. We always have. But she doesn't want to run a brewery. She wants us to run a brewery successfully. She's not on the board, but she does get to approve the slate of candidates for the board. So, and there's now committees that we used to do just sort of ad hoc are a little bit more formal, compensation, audit, that kind of thing. So.
Let's go up to the top there. Greg, you want to? In the middle. Greg.
Jack Stack bought out of Alice Chalmers the engine remanufacturing unit from them when they were going to close it down, and took about 113 employees with him. One of the things that he mentions is that one of the goals for the ESOP was for every employee to be able to afford to pay off their mortgage. Another thing that he mentions is that he cleaves off ancillary businesses ferociously, right? He focuses pretty tightly on the engine remanufacturing.
Well, he invests in them.
Yes,
so
he umbrellas them. He umbrellas them over.
He gets a decent percentage of their ownership. They spin off, and then if they do, it's genius. If they do really well, then he's got this nice chunk of equity for Springfield Remanufacturing has a nice chunk of equity in a business that they didn't pay much for because they bought it when it was really small.
And so I wonder, for those two things, if if you set out and actually set financial goals for the employees in the ESOP in the same manner that Stack did. And secondly, for the openness in terms of open books, if another example of openness is CPB's, and Boguski, of course, is no longer part of that, employee manual, which is online, which talks a lot about the profit motive of the corporation and how you pay attention to that while you're doing your core values within. And I wonder if you have comments either on the ESOP side or on the openness side.
I'm trying to on the ESOP side, we didn't say it needs to be a certain amount of money. We said, you know, one of our jobs as leaders in the company and as the board is to make sure that we're growing the share value. Of course, we're currently depressing the share value both because of Asheville and the transaction that we're doing. But the turnaround is pretty, you know, we've modeled it every which way to Sunday, and the turnaround is pretty good, and we would not have been able to achieve the kind of share value without Asheville because we would have lost, you know, all of that capacity and its attendant revenue. So when we were thinking about how do we say that to our coworkers, we realized that it was about 4 years of their salary. So, so that's you know, and who knows what will happen with that. But we've had some long tenured people. The long tenured people will have much, much, much more than that because they've been receiving shares since 1996. So.
Yeah, hi, my name is Nate, and I own a fitness business in Denver, and I'm a 1L law student. And even before taking on this whole law school thing, I feel like it was very tough to decide which things to tackle as a small business owner and which to kind of just say, hey, this we're not getting at. We're not going to get to this today. And I think, you know, it's relevant for all of us that are in school as well. I don't think any of us that have been entrepreneurs felt like we've done everything that we wanted to do. So especially in the early days, I'm curious how you prioritize that and you know, made decisions that met your core values and still made money without getting lost in the minutia of the day-to-day work.
As far as things we wanted to do for the business, it's a process. You can't do it all at once. Whether it's, I was on a phone interview with Inc. magazine today, and the woman asked me about being 100% carbon neutral. That's a big, big task. And, you know, you've got to remind yourself that you eat the bite of the elephant, you know, one at a time, that you can't do the whole thing. We didn't offer insurance for probably 3 years at New Belgium because we couldn't afford to. The first line of sustainability is keeping the doors open. Because, I mean, if there's only one definition of business sustainability, it's still being there, right? So, you know, I would say in our company, we would probably have said, okay, here are the 6 things we want to do, and here's what it looks like financially. And let's talk about what's most important, and maybe we'll do some environmental things, but also some coworker things, so we're not, you know, kind of overweighted in one area versus another. Or, you know, we'll start with catastrophic insurance because that's something we can afford to do this year. And with that, we'll say, you know, as soon as things look better, we'll go to full coverage where we pay the premium. And one of the things that does is to signal to your people, if we help this to work out well, we'll get more things. We we paid okay wages, but they were not the kinds of wages that we pay today because we couldn't afford to. And as we got bigger, and that's just the natural evolution of business. As you get bigger, you realize one, you look kind of bad when, you know, you're now this large business and you're paying people as if you're bootstrapping the company still. There should come a point with growth where you are no longer bootstrapping the company. And growth for us, we struggled with growth for a really long time. We still have conversations about it. But the thing that flipped it for us was realizing that our coworkers would not have new opportunities if we didn't grow. Because essentially everyone would be sitting in the same jobs, and nobody was going to, there was not going to be any, you know, sort of vibrant intellectual challenge for people because there was no new opportunity going on.
Thanks so much for taking the time today to come in.
My pleasure.
You actually teed up, my question was, what has been your transition as both a leader and also a businesswoman, starting with a very small brewing company and now kind of being the spearhead of this entrepreneurial spirit industry, both for your coworkers in the brewing community, but also for other industries looking at how the brewing industry conducts the local and organic movement to then be a bigger industry?
I'm sorry, I lost the question.
Just more of how are you handling the role between you being a small business owner to now kind of representing a large industry?
Sometimes badly. I drop balls. You know, I try not to be too hard on myself. I try to make sure, I do believe, as I've said a few times, that leaders lead. I did a keynote speech for our industry at our trade show. We have an annual trade show in 2003 where I said, and you know, this seems funny now, that I thought we could be 10% market share in our industry. And I wanted to, 10 years later, give the next keynote about, you know, what I thought it looked like now. Because I think, you know, when you spend a lot of time scanning that landscape and you are considered a leader, it's good to kind of get out there and do that. It's not the easy. Speaking about New Belgium, and my belief is really easy for me. Preparing a sort of rah-rah, this is where North is for people that are not my coworkers is harder. But you know, it's important. I speak at things like this because you are people who are making decisions about how you want to run your businesses or how you'll run businesses into the future. And one of our 10 core values and beliefs is to be a business role model, because we feel like, as I started out saying, there's this wonderful surprise where you learn that you get to use profits to do things that are intellectually interesting and that make your heart, you know, feel large and open, and enrich your own life and enrich the lives of people who are, you know, who are closely connected to you. And I can't really think of anything that, you know, is more meaningful than that. And I want to encourage other people to consider that.
Kim, thank you. This has been just a wonderful talk, really. Thanks for being so candid. So how would this have played out had you gone sort of the strategic route or the private equity route? I'm sort of interested to hear
Good
how you
question.
thought through it and which way it would go.
That's a good question. And, you know, I can, you know, guess at it, but I can't. So, private equity route. That was one of your two, strategic and private equity. You know, I think there's an interesting interplay between those two as well, because the strategic buyer is the person who says, you know, I've got a private equity firm. There are a whole bunch of guys who have a bunch of money, and they're almost always guys. And we make deals out in the world, and we take companies and we make them really valuable, and then we make our money by selling them, and we make more money. And our portfolio, you know, a 5-year time horizon for a private equity firm is long. So there's an interesting, I think, sort of interplay there. So who does the private equity firm sell a $200 million company to? I'm thinking probably a strategic buyer. So one of our thoughts is, well, why would we sell it to the private equity guy when we could just sell it to the strategic buyer if we wanted? Doesn't exactly answer your question, but the general MO of a private equity firm is to buy a company, look at all of the things that are not essential to running the business, and make some choices about which one of those do we keep and which one do we, get rid of. Because they want to say to the next buyer, hey, next buyer, take a look at this. It is so profitable. You're going to love this company. You should buy it from me. Well, the way that you make it really profitable is to take out unnecessary expense and also to increase the top line. But even if there are some things that are a step, like the cost of goods sold, they just go up. It's a variable cost, and so it goes up as your revenue goes up. So that makes me nervous, because how are we going to be a business role model if we no longer provide full health coverage or, a 6% 401k match or bicycles at a year or investments in technology that have our payback on some of our investments are really long. So that one didn't seem so great.
Did you need the capital at the time?
No, it was really more a function of someday I'm going to die, and I need to figure out how I'm going to wrap this thing up before that happens, because wrapping it up after it happens creates lots of problems for everybody. My kids, the company, my coworkers. It's doable, but it's kind of a mess. It's certainly not the elegant solution. And so that was our thinking, the board and me, about why to get, and it also, if you're doing it early on, you're kind of making choices for things that really appeal to you rather than, I think when you talk to people who sell businesses, they talk all the time about the people who show up sick or on the verge of divorce if they don't sell their business, who are like, I've got to sell this within the next 6 months. That's not an elegant end game either. So that's kind of the PE model, private equity. So the other one then is synergistic buyers. We could sell to Anheuser-Busch or Heineken or whomever. The craft industry is really, not just in craft beer, but in this case craft beer, is really interested in knowing about where their money's going and about the relationship between the beer they're drinking and the people who make it. And brand strength is a pretty important piece of the whole pie. And again, I couldn't get myself all fired up about selling to someone who makes, gajillions of barrels of beer every year. It didn't feel like the right end game for us. And it is for some people. I think that's another thing to worry about in the industry is there will be a lot of people trying to figure out, what do I do now? And that will be some people's solutions.
So I think Greg's got his hand up, and we'll give him the last question.
The last word.
Greg?
So Kim, you actually it was perfect timing. I've been thinking on this for a little while. I want to know, it sounds like you started the business from an environmental and ultimately an employee perspective from a very deep set of personal values. And we were just talking about the value of brand. And so how much do you think at this point that your environmental and social values help sell more beer?
So for those in the back,
did everyone hear that? I can repeat that. Did everyone heard it? Okay. I think, we always wonder about that. And I think it goes both ways. I think there are people who are like, oy, enough already with the, the brand story or the ESOP story or whatever. And, for a long time, we did all of these things and we didn't talk about them. And what motivated us to start talking about them was the business role model thing. But one of our sayings is, our practice is a splash, but talking about it is a ripple. And, you know, the ripples are farther reaching and have an opportunity to, you know, see more people saying, let's try some different ways of looking at our impact. You know, you heard about the thousands of gallons of water. That's a big, we actually now use dry lube, not for washing the outside of bottles, but on our line, which saved even more water. But I can't quantify it exactly. I think it goes both ways, and we kind of don't care. So, and one of the things we love about it is that, like, I don't know if any of you have ever seen we've done some television. We did something last year called Pairs Well with People. Everyone in the ad works at New Belgium, and the story is about New Belgium. It's about how people said Fat Tire was a stupid name. It's about how people said, you know, being employee-owned was not, you know, a really great idea. So we like that how we behave, and I'm real literal that way. And I don't like to be like I have enough thermal and electrical solar on my house for a couple of houses on my block face, because it matters to me. It matters that I'm doing that kind of thing. So,
Do you think that more of the craft beer companies have followed suit because you set the principle, because it's good business, or because they share your values?
I think it's the latter. I think craft brewers tend to be sort of a, let's try that, that'll be cool kind of group of people. And for people who choose to do those things, I think that's a big piece of it. They tend to perhaps be a little more, skew more liberally, progressively is the word.
As we wind up, I want to quickly highlight some people that during the reception you might say thank you to. First of all, Atlas is such a terrific partner. I want to highlight Jill and Atlas's role in making this series happen. Also, at Silicon Flatirons, as many of you know, we've got an incredible team. Anna Noskasi is here. I believe that Cactus is here. Anna doesn't want to raise a hand, but she's in the front row here. Cactus, Greg, Andy, and others. It really is a team effort, so if you get a chance to say thank you to them, please do. In terms of Ripples, thank you so much for coming and making Ripples tonight. In terms of building an intentional company and crafting a very interesting life, what a great story to share. Please help me thank you.
Thank you very much.